In the village of Nbara, where the clouds seemed to hang lower than they should and joy was spoken of like an illness, the sound of laughter had not echoed freely in decades. The elders taught that sorrow was sacred, that suffering bound people to truth, and that smiling in the face of hardship was a kind of arrogance, or worse, witchcraft. In Nbara, children were taught to weep before they could walk. The young were praised for silence, and praised even more for solemn eyes. So when Tisa was born, wide-eyed and cooing, her lips parting in a soft grin not long after her first breath, the midwives went still. One dropped the cloth she was using to clean the newborn's face. Another whispered, "Her mouth, look at her mouth." The child's mother, weak from labor, turned her face away, shivering not from pain but from something deeper. No one in the birthing hut spoke of it, but each woman there would remember that smile until her final days, not because it was beautiful, but because it was wrong. As she grew, Tisa remained different. While other children played quietly, Tisa giggled at falling leaves. She smiled at goats when they bleated, smiled at the mud when it sucked at her feet. She grinned at the rains, as if they were teasing her, and once even laughed out loud when lightning cracked a tree near the river. An old man passing by that day dropped his walking stick and called her cursed. "The spirits hear laughter and take it as mockery," he spat. "That one, that girl, she mocks the gods." By the time she was 10, people crossed the street when they saw her coming. They muttered prayers under their breath. Her father had long since vanished, taken by war or by shame, no one knew, and her mother remarried a bitter woman named Nafo, who believed sadness was a virtue and joy was sin. Nafo watched Tisa with eyes full of suspicion. If she smiled while grinding maize, Nafo slapped the back of her head. If she hummed while sweeping the compound, she was made to scrub the latrine pit. "Wipe that from your face," Nafo hissed one morning, grabbing Tisa's cheeks between her fingers until they hurt. "What do you have to smile for? Your shoes are borrowed. Your hair is short. You eat last. What joy is there in you, girl?" But the girl said nothing. She just stared back, her eyes shining, her lips twitching as if the smile was a creature of its own, one that would not be tamed by cruelty. That was the thing about Tisa. Her smile wasn't loud or forced. It wasn't showy. It was soft, almost shy. But it lingered too long. It came too easily. And that was what frightened people most. In a place where grief was a cloak and shame a daily prayer, her quiet joy was louder than thunder. Soon, whispers followed her wherever she went. Women warned their daughters not to befriend her. "Smiles attract misfortune," they said. "You'll draw evil with her." Children stopped playing near her. One day, a chicken squawked and ran in circles when she approached the coop, and an elder watching from his stool spat into the dirt 3 times, warding off whatever spirit he believed she carried. Even the fires, some claimed, burned lower in her presence. More than one person muttered that her smile could pull the heat out of a hearth. Nafo swore once that her stew had soured just because Tisa had stood nearby. That night, she beat her with a cooking spoon until her arms ached. But Tisa never stopped. Even when her skin bruised. Even when her stomach growled from skipped meals. Even when alone. Especially when alone. She'd sit beneath the crooked tree at the edge of the village, trace patterns in the dust, and smile, as though she knew something the rest of them didn't. As though she understood a secret about sorrow they had all forgotten. Once a year, when the sun turned pale behind the thickest clouds and the moon refused to rise for 3 nights straight, the people of Nbara gathered for what they called the Festival of Mourning. It was not a celebration, but a performance, a sacred reenactment of grief. The old said it honored the ancestors who suffered during the long hunger, when fields dried and children vanished in the night. Others believed it was meant to ward off happiness, which was seen as an invitation to loss. The preparations began days in advance. Women carried urns of soot and ground charcoal. Men slaughtered black goats and poured their blood into shallow basins, smearing the crimson across their doorposts. Children were instructed to cry, even if their hearts felt light. It was forbidden to wear color. Drums were muted with cloth, and any sound louder than a whisper was punished. Even babies were kept away from laughter. Mothers whispered lullabies shaped like whales. Tisa had watched the festival every year since she was small. She had seen how the people walked with slumped shoulders, faces streaked with ash and goat blood, mouths twisted in grief. She had watched how the elders wailed in the village square, slapping their chests with open palms until their skin bruised. And always, the people watched one another, not out of empathy, but suspicion. If someone did not cry, they were accused of pride. If their cries didn't sound sincere, they were deemed dangerous. That year, the festival began under a sickle-shaped moon. The air was thick with smoke. Drizzling rain turned the ash-covered faces into streaked masks of black and gray. The morning songs began, long, low dirges sung in the old tongue, meant to mimic the sounds of mourning spirits. Everyone bowed their heads as the song leader began to chant. But Tisa didn't cry. She stood near the edge of the square, her arms crossed loosely over her chest, her head tilted back slightly. She had come, as was required, her face dusted in ash and her feet bare. But as the song twisted and groaned through the air like a dying animal, something fluttered in her. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't mockery. It was something older. A warmth. A memory of her mother's laugh, years ago, before the sadness fully took root in her home. A thought of a goat kid stumbling awkwardly. The way dew clung to spiderwebs like diamonds in the morning. The corners of her lips twitched. Just slightly. Her smile wasn't wide. It barely showed teeth. But it was there. A child standing beside her gasped. One of the elder women turned, eyes narrowed like knives. Did she whispered. Within seconds, the song halted. The air held its breath. Every head turned. The girl who smiled. She dares, someone muttered. Tisa, another growled. The smile eater. The witch of joy. Then came the elders. 4 of them. The oldest, known only as Grandmother Saya, stepped forward, her face already wet with artificial tears. Her voice, when she spoke, was a trembling growl. You smile while we mourn? Tisa looked around. The faces that had once turned away from her now stared with open hatred. I didn't mean, she began, but Grandmother Saya raised her hand. No. You chose this. We've warned you year after year. Your joy is a disease. And today, it spreads. The other elders seized her arms. Bring the bowl, Saya ordered. From the shadows, a boy emerged carrying a gourd. It stank, a foul mix of rotted dung, pig filth, and something worse. Human waste. The stench hit Tisa like fire. She struggled. No, please, I didn't laugh, I didn't mean. But they dragged her to the center of the square. She who smiles in sorrow, Saya intoned, scooping a handful of the filth, must wear it smell. The villagers joined the chant. She who smiles in sorrow, must wear it smell. The first smear hit her cheek like slime. Another across her forehead. Then down her chin. The elders did not stop. They rubbed it into her skin, into her scalp. When she gagged, someone slapped her. Open your mouth, they said. When she refused, another slap. Tisa stood trembling, now covered head to toe in the reeking mixture. It dripped from her chin. It caked in her hair. She who smiles in sorrow, must wear it smell. The chant grew louder. Children shouted it with glee, not even knowing what it meant. And Tisa, she did not cry. Her eyes stung from the filth, her nose burned, her throat ached. But her tears did not fall. She stood frozen, a statue of shame. When they were done, the elders stepped back. The square fell silent again. She will not be whipped, Saya said. Let shame be her punishment. Let her own face carry her curse. They left her standing there in the middle of the square. And as the crowd turned away, returning to their dirges and laments, none of them saw the faint shimmer behind Tisa's eyes. A flicker. A tremor of something waiting. Something watching. That night, Long after the chants had faded and the torches around the square died down, Tisa wandered through the outskirts of Nbara, her skin still reeking, her hair stiff with filth. No one had spoken to her since the punishment. No one offered water, no cloth to clean herself. Even the goats avoided her when she passed. The shame clung not only to her body, but to her spirit. She walked with her arms close to her chest, like she could hide inside herself. The villagers said she should sleep in the refuse hut that night, to match what she now was, but Tisa couldn't bring herself to crawl into a place even dogs avoided. Instead, she sat beneath the gnarled roots of the old thorn tree on the northern ridge, a place where broken things were sometimes left. Broken pots. Broken tools. Broken children, some said. She stared at the dark soil and wished it would swallow her. A soft sound interrupted the stillness, a shuffling, like feet dragging through dead leaves. Tisa's head lifted slightly. From the shadows emerged a figure hunched over, her back curved like a question mark. Her hair was white as bone, and her clothes were nothing more than stitched rags tied in strange knots. It was the beggar woman. No one knew her name, only that she wandered from village to village, always muttering, always alone. Most children were taught not to look her in the eyes. But now, she stood just a few paces away, head tilted, watching Tisa with something that might have been sorrow, or curiosity. "They rubbed it into your skin," the old woman croaked. "But they cannot rub it out of your bones." Tisa didn't respond. Her throat felt dry and full of dust. "You smell of shame," the woman said. "But the smell fades. What they really fear is the thing inside you that does not." She reached into her faded cloth satchel and pulled something out, a glint of silver. "Here. When you no longer know who you are, use this." She pressed it into Tisa's hands, a jagged shard of mirror, no longer than her palm, the edges worn smooth from age. The glass was clouded but not cracked. Oddly heavy. Before Tisa could speak, the woman turned and began walking back into the shadows. Her voice floated behind her like smoke. "Careful what you reflect, little smile. Some faces aren't meant to return." Tisa stared after her, heart thudding. Then she looked down at the shard. It didn't show anything. Not at first. She raised it to eye level. The moonlight gave just enough illumination for her to see something. Her face. But it was wrong. Not dirty. Not smeared. She saw her own eyes, but brighter. Her cheeks, smooth, unmarked. Her lips, curved into a wide, unsettling smile. Whiter than any she'd ever dared wear. Her other self in the glass was smiling as though nothing had happened. As though the day had been a feast, not a public degradation. And the strangest part, the girl in the mirror was looking not at Tisa, but through her. Into her. Tisa's hand trembled. She blinked. For a moment, the face flickered, a split-second distortion, like a ripple on water. Then the reflection leaned closer. Not her body. Just the image. The smiling version tilted her head slowly, mockingly. Then it whispered. The sound didn't come from outside. It curled up from somewhere within Tisa's own ears, like a secret breath sliding between her ribs. "Let me smile for you now." Tisa's breath caught. She dropped the shard. It landed in the dirt with a dull thud but didn't shatter. Instead, as she stared at it lying face up, she saw a crack spider its way across the surface, thin, sharp, delicate, not from the outside, but from within the glass itself. Like something inside had pressed too hard. Her heart thundered in her chest. She reached down slowly, fingertips brushing the shard, expecting it to feel hot or pulsing. But it was cool. Almost comforting. She clutched it to her chest, curling around it like it was a secret. That night, Tisa did not sleep. She sat curled beneath the thorn tree, watching the stars fade behind clouds. At one point, she closed her eyes, just briefly, and in the blackness behind her eyelids, she saw her own smile floating, detached from her face, like a mask with no strings. The next morning, when she walked through the edge of the village, people stared. Not because she stank. Not because of the shame, but because something felt different. A woman fetching water paused and frowned. "She's still smiling," she muttered to her neighbor. "After all that, she still smiles." Another man muttered, "She's cracked in the head." But it wasn't madness they feared. It was the calmness in her step. The way her smile didn't reach her eyes. The way her shadow looked wrong when the light hit her, just slightly delayed, like it was pretending. No one saw the mirror shard hidden in her sash. No one saw how, every time she touched it, her grin sharpened. And no one knew what had begun to awaken in the girl who had been smeared in dung and left to rot in shame, a girl whose reflection had started smiling on its own. The morning after the festival, Nafo refused to let Tisa enter the house. She stood at the doorway with arms crossed, eyes narrow, and a wet rag tied around her nose to block the stench. Tisa stood a few feet away, still covered in dried filth, her hands clasped together as if praying for the smallest mercy. "You won't bring your curses into this compound," Nafo said coldly. "You've turned this household into shame. No more. Out." Tisa said nothing. She didn't even flinch. Her lips were drawn into that same, quiet smile, the one that had haunted the square the night before. The one that hadn't broken even when they rubbed filth into her mouth. Nafo reached down and picked up a stick. "If you linger, I'll beat you back into the ash you crawled from." Tisa turned and walked away. She didn't ask where she should go. She didn't protest or beg. She walked straight through the village paths, past the staring eyes and whispering mouths, until the ground beneath her feet turned gray and gritty. Past the gardens, past the goat pens, past the prayer trees. Until she reached the ash house. It was little more than a stone hut with a low, caved-in roof and smoke-stained walls. Once used to burn goat bones and cast out unclean things, it had long been abandoned. No one lived there, not even wild dogs. It sat in a dip between two hills like a forgotten blister on the land. The air stank of charcoal, decay, and things better left unnamed. Flies drifted lazily in and out through the slats in the stone. There was no door, only a blackened cloth that hung like a tongue from the ceiling. Tisa pushed it aside and entered. The floor was uneven and layered in old ashes, thick enough to coat her feet as she stepped. The only furniture was a warped wooden stool and a broken basket turned sideways in the corner. The roof groaned under the weight of years. Insects scurried from her presence. But none of it made her hesitate. She knelt, dug into her sash, and pulled out the mirror shard. The crack had grown. Just slightly, a thread-thin line that curled like a vein across the glass. She held it up, stared into it, and smiled. Her reflection smiled back. But not like before. This time, the other version of herself held her gaze longer. Tilted its head slower. Blinked second. Tisa said nothing. She tucked the shard under a loose brick in the wall and sat down cross-legged in the middle of the room, breathing in the ashes like they were incense. The air was heavy, but she didn't choke. She had breathed worse. Days passed. Smoke drifted in from the fire pits nearby, and the scent of burnt hair and bones seemed to settle into her skin. At night, she didn't light a lamp. She watched the stars through a crack in the roof and listened to the sounds of the earth groaning beneath her. Every morning, she brushed her fingers through the ashes and left shapes in the floor, swirls, lines, sigils she didn't remember learning. At first, the villagers thought she would wither away. But she didn't. She grew stranger. Word began to spread. A goat herder claimed he passed the ash house one dawn and saw Tisa sitting in the doorway. He said she smiled at him, and all three of his goats ran in opposite directions, refusing to return until sundown. A child wandered too close one afternoon, chasing a kite made from palm leaves. When he saw her through the windowless frame of the hut, he dropped the kite and ran home crying. His mother found him hiding under the bed, mumbling, her teeth were wrong, her teeth were too many. Tisa didn't leave the hut often. When she did, she walked the edge of the village with soft steps, her eyes always half lowered, her smile calm and unreadable. But things changed around her. One morning, a merchant lit a fire near the communal granary. He claimed it sparked just fine, until Tisa passed by. The flames turned blue, hissed like snakes, and died instantly. She looked at it and it choked, he told the elders. A week later, a hunter returned from the riverbanks. His face was pale, mouth dry, eyes unfocused. He clutched his bronze hand mirror, something he carried for years to check behind him in the bush. I saw her, he whispered. In the reflection. Smiling. But she wasn't behind me. She wasn't anywhere. He showed the mirror to his brothers. It had fogged over. Permanently. No matter how they wiped it, no reflection returned. People began to avoid the path near the ash house. Some hung charms in the trees, others sprinkled salt across the dirt. But nothing stopped the feeling that reality itself had grown brutal around that hut. When Tisa smiled now, it wasn't warm. It wasn't even human. Surfaces reacted to it. A clay bowl cracked when she drank from it while grinning. The handle of a calabash peeled slightly when she smiled and touched it. One night, a woman tending her lantern saw her reflection in the flame's light twist, just as Tisa walked by, her own face sagging, her smile melting like wax. Ash coated everything around the hut. Even when there was no wind. Even when no fire had been burned. It clung to the air like memory. And inside the hut, beneath the loose brick, the mirror shard slept. And every time Tisa touched it, the crack deepened. But still, it never shattered. The night the bone woman came, the wind didn't blow, and the ashes inside the hut floated upward instead of falling. Tisa was lying awake on the floor, her fingers tracing slow circles in the soot beside her. She had stopped sleeping much. Sleep opened the door too wide. In dreams, the girl in the mirror whispered strange riddles and asked questions Tisa didn't understand. But that night, there was no dream. No sound, no breeze, only a shifting in the dark, a ripple, like breath being drawn through bone. The ashes swirled suddenly into the shape of a body, not fully formed, but unmistakably present. The figure that stepped forward was tall and thin, her frame wrapped in strips of gray cloth and animal sinew. Bones dangled from her neck like ornaments. Her eyes were hollows of smoke. Her hands, if they were hands, crackled like branches as she raised them. Tisa did not scream. She sat up slowly, her heart thudding but her face calm, her lips already curling at the corners in a slow, knowing smile. The figure regarded her. Then spoke. You wore dung and still smiled. That is not weakness, she said, her voice brittle but powerful. That is spellcraft. Tisa blinked. Who are you? I am called many things. The bone woman, to those who still remember. The ash sister. The wound that watches. I watched you as they broke you. And I saw the truth, you did not break. Tisa tilted her head. Then why do I feel like I did? The bone woman stepped closer. Because you've been taught to believe that pain must be hidden. That a woman must shrink beneath sorrow. But pain, when shaped, becomes art. And art becomes power. Your smile was never simple. It was a blade. But you've never been taught to hold it properly. Tisa stood, unsure whether to be afraid or grateful. I will teach you, said the bone woman, if you are willing to learn the craft of sorrow writhing. That night, under the collapsed roof of the ash house, the lessons began. The first lesson was silence. Speak nothing, the bone woman instructed. Feel everything. Pain has a language. Let it teach your face. She made Tisa sit before a bowl of bone water, a liquid boiled from crushed marrow and rain. Tisa stared into it for hours, letting her face move through every memory, her mother's silence, her stepmother's slaps, the villagers' chants, the choking stink of shame. Her face shifted with each feeling, a grimace here, a wince there, until finally, as tears threatened to fall, the bone woman stopped her. Now smile, she commanded. Tisa did. The water rippled, not from touch, but from the expression alone. A whisper moved across the surface, and a crow perched outside let out a ragged shriek before flying away in a panic. You see, the bone woman said. Smiles are not warmth. They are mirrors turned outward. You've learned to survive. Now you must learn to shape. The second lesson was control. The bone woman brought her shards, fragments of old mirror, bone, and obsidian. Each night, Tisa was made to frown in front of them. To summon not anger, but the shape of it. The memory of it. To sculpt it across her face with discipline. Not rage, the bone woman barked. That's too easy. Feel the betrayal that sits beneath it. Let that write itself into your brow. Tisa stared. She focused. Her lips curled downward slowly. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw stiffened, not clenched, but forged. The air around her shifted. A single shard cracked. A thin, perfect line down the center. Tisa blinked. Then smiled. The bone woman nodded. The face is not for beauty, she said. It is for prophecy. Days and nights blurred. No one came near the ash house anymore. Even birds avoided the sky above it. The ground around the hut blackened as if something underneath it had begun to breathe. Tisa learned to walk with her back arched slightly, the way pain teaches you to carry yourself. She learned to tilt her chin to convey defiance, to twitch her eye at just the right moment to make someone hesitate before speaking. She practiced smiling in darkness, full, bright, ghost-white grins that lingered when she turned her face away. The bone woman taught her how to twist her joy into threat. How to use her eyes to cut deeper than words ever could. You were punished for smiling, she whispered one night. But they were right to fear it. A curse wrapped in sorrow has edges they will never see coming. By the end of the 6th night, Tisa no longer looked like the girl who once wept behind the granary. She had not changed her clothes. Her face still bore the marks of exile. But the way she moved, it sent shivers through shadows. One night, she asked, "Why me? Why now?" The bone woman replied, "Because your smile did not die. And anything that survives that kind of fire is not human anymore. It is something more." Then, as the ashes swirled again, the bone woman began to fade. "I've given you what I know," she said. "The rest is yours to shape. When next they see your smile, they will remember what it means to bury a flame and find it burning deeper." When she vanished, the silence returned. Tisa stood in the center of the ash house, her eyes closed, her breath steady. She smiled. And the walls around her shivered. The road back to Nbara was dry and cracked, the way lips get in the heat of morning. Tisa walked barefoot, a thin veil of soot and ash cloaking her from head to toe. No one saw her arrive. No footsteps stirred the sand. No animals barked or brayed. She passed beneath the thorn trees unnoticed, until she stood once again at the edge of the village that had once spat her out like spoiled fruit. Gone was the girl who had tried to smile for belonging. What returned was something else, something shaped in pain and forged in flame. She did not enter with song or cry. She merely walked, slow and still, like smoke through a room. And the village, without knowing why, grew cold. Her veil hid most of her face, but not her mouth. That curve, small, soft, unsettling, peeked out from the shadow. It was not wide. Not mocking. Not angry. Just wrong. Too calm for someone who'd suffered. Too familiar for someone they swore had died in the ash house. The baker saw her first. He was wiping flour from his window when he looked up, and froze. A woman in gray passed silently, her smile barely visible beneath the veil. His hand slipped, and the glass jar beside him fell. It shattered. He looked down, startled, then up again. But she was already gone. That night, his daughter screamed in her sleep. Screamed like something had climbed into her dreams with nails and whispered of burning. She refused to look at mirrors afterward. When asked why, she only muttered, "The lady with the smile. The smile made my head hurt." 2 days later, the blacksmith was pounding iron when he saw her standing across the road, silent, still, watching. A stranger, he thought, until she tilted her head. And smiled. It was no more than a twitch. A bare lift of the cheek. but it hit him like heat to a wound. He turned away, breath caught in his throat. That night, the mirror in his hut cracked straight down the middle. Then his wife's face in the glass fractured too, even though the mirror remained still. They both ran outside and didn't return until morning. Word spread quickly. A woman in ash gray walked through Nbara, never speaking, never touching, never demanding, and yet, things began to break. Elders who glimpsed her smile claimed they saw someone behind them, just out of sight, in their own reflections, someone weeping blood. One elder dared to call it a trick. He followed her through the market, watching her, mocking her silence. She turned once, and smiled. He dropped his staff. He was found the next day sitting by the well, staring at nothing, muttering, "She smiled through me, not at me, through me." Even the livestock felt it. Goats began refusing to graze in fields where she had passed. Crops wilted without warning, the yams first, then the okra, then the cassava. Only in places her eyes had lingered. Children cried in corners when the air changed. Mothers began covering the faces of infants when she walked past, as if her smile might climb into their tiny bones and twist something vital. Still, she said nothing. She hurt no one. She only walked. And smiled. Even the priest, the one who had told the villagers to smear dung on her face to bleed out the laughter, noticed her one morning. She was standing beneath the baobab tree, veiled as always, that half-smile barely visible in the shadow. He walked toward her with his sacred staff and holy beads. "Daughter," he said cautiously, though he didn't recognize her. "Why do you grin so wickedly in the house of God?" She said nothing. He moved closer. Still nothing. Then, before turning away, she smiled fully, not with lips alone, but with cheekbones, with the angle of her eyes, with the sharp lift of memory behind it. A slow, deliberate smile like someone pulling a knife from silk. The priest stumbled back. She vanished between the huts like smoke pulled by wind. The next morning, the priest washed his face, lit his incense, and stood before his mirror. What he saw was nothing. No nose. No eyes. Just skin where his face should have been. Smooth. Empty. He screamed so loud the crows took to the air in a frenzy. That day, he bound every mirror in the temple with black cloth and never uncovered them again. Panic crept in like mildew. The village no longer hummed. It hushed. And no one dared speak her name. They did not know it was Tisa. How could they? The girl they had known was broken, soft, sweet-smiled. This woman had silence on her lips and death behind her grin. But deep in their bones, they knew. The memory of what they'd done clung to her like scent to rot. They tried to drive her out again, but no one could approach her. Each time someone came close, they found themselves frozen. Not by fear alone, but by shame too vast to speak aloud. They tried to lock their doors and wait for her to vanish. But she never knocked. She just stood, sometimes near the well, sometimes outside the shrine, sometimes by the gate. Always smiling. Always watching. The days stretched long and sick with dread. The villagers whispered to each other. She cursed our water. She turned our children strange. She made my mirror weep. But still, she had done nothing. Only smiled. And it was that which made them tremble most. It began with a hush. Not the hush of fear, nor of awe, but of something older, deeper. The hush that comes before a storm, or before bones remember the pain they once carried. The hush of memory waking. The sun had begun to dim. Not yet gone, but fading behind a shadow creeping across the sky. The village of Nbara stood under a heavy silence as the eclipse began its slow descent. And there, in the square where they had smeared dung across her cheeks and laughed until her spirit bled, Tisa stood again. She climbed the wooden stage alone. No announcement. No music. No torchlight. Just her, veiled in ash gray, barefoot, slow, steady, as though the ground itself owed her passage. They watched her like ghosts in their own homes. Some from windows, some from behind trees, others from inside cracked doorways, holding their children close, covering the polished metal on their walls, unsure why their chests felt tight. The air thickened with shadow. The eclipse now hung directly above, a bruised ring of gold where the sun once roared. And in that suspended breath of a moment, Tisa reached up. The veil slid down like smoke. She did not speak. Her face glowed, not from paint, not from oil, but from something not quite of this world. A radiance, soft but impossible to ignore, surrounded her brow, her cheekbones, her chin. Yet it wasn't beauty that stopped their hearts. It was the smile. Wide. Unnatural. Etched in place like grief frozen in wax. Her eyes did not smile, only the mouth did. Lips curved up, cheeks raised, but hollow. A smile born in torment, molded by fire, and preserved by time. Some swore the air itself recoiled. And then, it began. In the square, the mirror behind the market stall trembled. Crack. It splintered straight down the middle. A woman screamed. Inside the weaver's hut, a polished copper bowl turned dark, and then burst into shards. In the shrine, the priest's old mirror wept water, dripping onto the altar until the flames sputtered out. Every surface that could hold a reflection, glass, metal, even still water, trembled, shimmered, then cried. The sound was not of shattering alone. It was weeping. Like thousands of voices sobbing through broken mouths. Children stared in horror as their own faces in water jars turned to ashen tears. Young men saw their reflections whisper their secrets aloud. Old women watched the faces of dead husbands scream back at them from clay pots. And worst of all, in each shard, they saw themselves. Not as they wished to be, but as they were on the day they heard her. Laughing. Pointing. Holding Dung. Holding shame. The crowd fell to their knees, one by one. A man tried to look away, but every polished thing in the square turned toward him. 100 broken eyes stared at him until he screamed and ran. The village healer, the one who once dabbed salve on Tisa's face and whispered, "Hide your joy, girl. It brings trouble," dropped to her knees. She clutched her chest and sobbed. "Forgive us," she howled into the dust. "Forgive us." Tisa did not move. Her smile, still fixed, spoke everything. It said, "I forgave myself. You? You must learn your own healing." More screams rose. More mirrors bled. The children cried, "Mama, where am I?" and clutched their mothers tightly, because their reflections had vanished. Not broken. Not smeared. Gone. Across the village, reflections began to disappear. Men could no longer see themselves in water. Women tried to braid their hair and found no face looking back. The blacksmith polished a blade, and the metal showed only sky. The priest stood before his altar and saw nothing but his trembling robes in the chalice, no face, no body. Only one reflection remained. Tisa's. Everywhere there had been glass or shine, her face stared back. Smiling. Not cruel. Not kind. Just there. Unchanging. The village of Mbara began to howl. Some begged. Some fainted. Some ran into the forest. But Tisa only stood, the eclipse's golden shadow painting her face in burning light. The healer crawled forward, reaching for Tisa's feet, tears streaming down her face. "We were wrong," she choked. "You smiled to survive. And we called it wickedness. You smiled to stay whole. And we broke you. Please." Tisa looked down at her. The smile twitched. A tremble passed through the dust. And just then, just before the sun re-emerged, she whispered a single word. "Remember." The sky split with sudden light as the eclipse ended. Shadows fled. And when the villagers blinked through the brightness, the stage was empty. Tisa was gone. But the mirrors were not whole again. They remained broken. And worse, they remained empty. From that day on, no one in Bara saw their own reflection again. They would look and see nothing. Nothing at all. Not in glass. Not in water. Not in dreams. Only in each other's eyes did they glimpse shadows of themselves, twisted, uncertain, flickering. And when they smiled, it never quite reached their eyes. Because they could no longer remember what joy truly looked like. Only what it had cost. The stepmother ran. She did not pack. She did not pray. She did not even tell her husband, not that he would have followed. Not now. Not with the village in chaos and mirrors crying like haunted children. She simply fled, clutching her headscarf, barefoot across the cracked red earth, back to her hut on the edge of the yam fields. The one place she thought the past could not follow. But memory had already arrived. The moment she stepped inside, the fire in her hearth went out. Not with smoke, but silence. The air was cold, though the night was hot. Her walls, once lined with polished bowls and ceremonial spoons, seemed to breathe. They watched her now. She stepped cautiously to her cooking pot. There, in the black surface of the water she had left for boiling, was a face. Not her own. Tisa. Smiling. The stepmother gasped and threw the pot across the room. It cracked against the wall, water hissing onto the ground. She turned. On the ladle, Tisa's smile. On the metal clasp of her storage chest, Tisa's smile. On the ivory ring her mother gave her, Tisa's smile. She lunged to the shelf, knocking down all the bowls, smashing them one by one. But it did not matter. Because then, her shadow moved. She froze. The fire was out. There was no light source. But on the wall, her own shadow still lingered. Only, it was smiling. She turned around. She wasn't. Her lips were trembling. Her breath sharp. Her body cold. She wasn't smiling. But her shadow was. Slow. Creeping. Curling at the corners. She grabbed a cloth and covered the last intact mirror in her hut. Then sat on her knees, muttering. "She's just a girl," she whispered. "Just a girl. She was nothing. I gave her food. I gave her shelter." But the room replied in hushes, not words. The hush of all the times she poured ash into Tisa's food. The hush of her laughter when she made the girl kneel beside dogs. The hush of delight when Tisa's dress was torn by village boys. The hush of cruelty never confessed. She felt her throat tighten. Her reflection, wherever it had hidden, returned in flickers, in the brass rings, in the oil patch on the floor. But something was wrong. Her skin, it looked cracked. She touched her cheek. A flake came off. Just a small one. But beneath it, gray. She rushed to the water jug. The surface trembled. She dared to look. Her own face now had fractures, like cracked porcelain, running from her eyes down to her chin. Her lips looked stiff. Her cheeks sagged with a weight that wasn't flesh, but guilt. She stumbled back, grabbing the edge of the window. And saw herself. Not as she was. But as a girl. Innocent. Clean. Young. Smiling. Not bitter. Not cruel. Smiling. The stepmother choked back a sob. She remembered. She had once danced in the rain. Once braided her sister's hair. Once sang lullabies to birds nesting above her window. Once smiled because the world was still soft. But then she was hurt. Mocked. Left behind. And so she passed it on. She became the pain. She stopped smiling and made sure no one else dared to. And now. Her lips twitched. For the first time in years, a smile crept up. It was real. It was sad. It was hers. And the moment it reached full bloom, she cracked. Hairline fractures spread across her body. She gasped, but no sound came. A wind passed through the room. Gentle. And she collapsed. Not with a thud. Not with drama. Just crumbling. Like dust from an old bone. Fine, soft ash settled across the hut floor, swirling in silence. By morning, all that remained was a faint print in the dirt, the shape of a smile. And in the folds of her scarf, a single hummingbird feather. Outside, the wind carried the ash into the yam fields. The same fields Tisa once tilled in rags. Now fertile again. The ash field stood empty for days. Where the old hut once leaned, smoke now curled into the dusk like a ghost exhaling. The villagers gathered, hushed and uncertain. Some said they saw her walk into the flames, smiling. Others claimed the fire began only after she vanished. No bones were found in the ruins. Only the cracked shard of a mirror, its edges curled like wilted leaves. Tisa was gone. But she was not forgotten. Not anymore. Her name was no longer whispered in shame, but in caution. In reverence. In warning. Because soon, the stories began. A girl in the neighboring village, beaten for singing during chores, awoke to find a small shard of mirror beneath her mat, etched with a face, smiling through tears. A boy who mocked his younger sister's joy found, one morning, that every reflection of his own face was reversed, and refused to blink when he did. A cruel ant in the hills tried to throw her orphan niece into a well. That night, her own face appeared in every puddle, contorted in agony. By sunrise, her hair had turned the color of soot. The village healer said, "Some spirits seek rest. She seeks balance." Mothers began warning their children. Don't laugh at sadness, she might be watching. Don't spit on the joyful, she listens through mirrors. And then came the proverb, carved first into the side of a calabash, then whispered across markets and passed like breath from midwives to daughters. If your joy shames others, hide your smile from glass. No one knew who said it first. But everyone remembered. On certain nights, quiet, heat-heavy nights when even crickets held their breath, children claimed to see her. Not standing. Not walking. But reflected. In the pond behind the yam fields. In the surface of a bowl left unwashed. In the corner of a window pane fogged by sleep. A girl. Not aged. Not broken. Just smiling. Her lips cracked, her eyes glowing, soft but unreadable. The smile did not move. It did not fade. It simply remained, like a scar stitched across water. Some say she guards the kind-hearted. Some say she punishes mockers of pain. But others believe something deeper. That Tisa never burned. That her body did not vanish, only shifted. That she now lives inside every reflection that once betrayed a child's dignity. And when injustice ripples the surface of the world, she rises, smile first. Waiting. Watching. Not with vengeance. But with the quiet, terrible patience of someone who once knelt in ashes. And smiled anyway. The tale of Tisa passed from one village to the next, as softly and surely as smoke from a smoldering fire. At first, it was only a whisper among the women who knew suffering, a name murmured beneath breath while gathering water, or stitched into lullabies for restless children. But over time, it grew into something more. A presence. A force. Tisa, the girl who smiled through dung, through exile, through ash. Tisa, the smile that broke mirrors. She had no grave, no shrine, no song carved in stone. But in the forests and cities of the southern lands, people began to summon her all the same. Children, bruised by angry hands or shamed for weeping, would sneak out at dusk and leave cracked pieces of mirror at the base of trees. They'd whisper, "Come, smile for me," and flee before the fog thickened. Some claimed the mirror shards vanished by morning. Others swore they returned home to find a bowl of clean water on their doorstep, perfectly still, and when they looked in, they saw not themselves, but her. Always smiling. Always watching. In the cities, among market women and laborers, especially those who'd buried sons or hidden bruises, a quiet ritual emerged. They would press ash powder to their cheeks before stepping out into the world. When asked why, they would simply say, let her smile through me. To some, it was fashion. To others, mourning. But among the silenced and the exiled, it was prayer. More than once, a woman facing a cruel husband or unjust trial would stand tall, smile, and something would change. Mirrors would fog. Judges would stammer. Shadows would twitch behind their backs. And though the woman herself said nothing, her smile stretched just a little too wide. Just a little too long. And justice, somehow, came. In the hill villages, the elders grew wary. They began forbidding mirrors at funerals, especially for those who had died disgraced. If your grief is real, they warned, don't let your face show joy, or she may answer. Some mocked the fear. But those who did, often found their shadows lagging behind them for days. Or their reflections smiling before they did. Or worse, not smiling at all. Tisa was no longer a girl. She had become a story. A spirit. A reckoning. She belonged to no shrine, yet was everywhere. In silver bowls left uncovered during storms. In the surface of river water after a lie is told. In the flicker of glass when a mother hides her daughter's laughter. And in time, she had many names. The ash grin. She who watches the joyless. The face in fog. But the name that remained, that was whispered longest, even in the mouths of trembling elders, was she who smiles for the silenced. Because that's who she had become. Not a ghost, nor a curse. Not exactly. But a guardian of every child who was told to smile while hurting. Of every girl mocked for dancing barefoot. Of every orphan locked in a room and told to be grateful. She smiled, not because the world deserved it. But because the world once demanded it. And she gave it back. On her own terms. A smile that cracked glass. A smile that made fire turn cold. A smile that made the wind shift and whispers stop. And though her face was never seen again in full, mothers still tell their children when the dusk air grows too still. If you hear laughter in the fog, be kind. If you see your reflection smile before you do, bow your head. Because Tisa watches. Not to haunt. Not to punish. But to remind. That even in silence, even in ash, there can be power. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the world is not a scream or a blade. But a girl who smiles when she isn't supposed to. The world feared her joy. So she gave them what they deserved. A smile that never fades.